You can't point to the exact moment your reflection changed, but you know there was a night when it did. Not the reflection in the mirror that still showed the same jawline, the same eyes, the same easy smile. No, this change was deeper, invisible to everyone else. It was the sound of a heavy iron gate locking inside your chest. You'd been the kind of man who thought loyalty was its own reward. You stayed up late when she needed to talk. And you remembered the little details, the brand of tea she liked, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. You gave, not because you expected anything in return, but because that's what love meant to you. And for a long time, you thought the world would meet that love with the same open hands. But there's a truth you learned the hard way. Not everyone understands kindness. Some only notice it when they can use it. She was the one who taught you that lesson. It didn't happen in one explosive moment of betrayal. No, it came like winter frost, creeping quietly into the cracks of trust you didn't even know were there. Her laugh started sounding different, not louder or softer, just less yours. Her eyes didn't light up when you walked into the room the way they used to. The little compliments you once received without asking, they stopped coming. At first, you blamed yourself. Men like you always do. Maybe you had become predictable. Maybe you were too steady, too safe. You thought, if I can just love her better, she'll come back to me the way she used to. But then, one day, you realized something gut-wrenching. She wasn't impressed by your devotion anymore. She was measuring it, calculating how much more she could take before chasing the next thrill. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." What he didn't say is that sometimes only one walks away stronger, while the other turns to ash. And when you love first, you burn first. You lead with warmth, thinking it will always be enough. But when that warmth is traded for someone colder, someone who knows the power of withholding, something inside you dies. From there, the change begins. Not all at once, but in pieces. You stop trusting so easily, not just her, but women, people, the very idea of giving without armor. That's how the seed is planted. That's how a good man starts walking toward a version of himself he never imagined becoming. You begin to see the world as a place where kindness is a liability. You stop playing the game with your heart exposed. You start counting rules you never wanted to follow. And when you enter the next relationship, you carry your heart so close to your chest, no one gets near it. The irony? The same women who once passed you over for being too soft now lean in, curious, drawn to your distance. They mistake it for strength, but deep down, you know it's something else. It's scar tissue. And here's the tragedy. She didn't just hurt you. She built you into something harder, colder, more calculating. She gave you armor you never asked for. And now, you can't remember how to take it off. It didn't begin with fireworks. It began with a glance. A short, almost imperceptible shift in her gaze when another man entered the room. It wasn't long, it wasn't obvious, but you knew her eyes well enough to notice the difference. The faint spark you used to ignite flickered for someone else. You told yourself it was nothing, and maybe in that exact moment, it was. But inside you, something shifted, like the faint ping of glass under stress. The mirror of your love was still whole, but now, there was a fracture running through it. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that human desire swings like a pendulum, from pain when we want something we don't have, to boredom when we finally hold it. You never thought that would apply to her. You believed you could be the exception. If you loved deeply enough, consistently enough, maybe the pendulum would freeze in your favor. But the pendulum doesn't care about exceptions. It swings because it must. From that moment, you began noticing things you had once been blind to. The way her thumb lingered on her phone screen before turning it face down. The subtle change in her laughter with certain people. Not louder, not happier, just different. The casual comparisons she made between you and other men, like she was quietly holding you against a shadow you couldn't see. This wasn't betrayal in the way movies show it. No big reveal, no shattered wine glasses or screaming matches. It was smaller than that. It was the slow withdrawal of intimacy, the emotional equivalent of someone quietly packing their bags while you sleep. And you started packing too. Not physically, emotionally. You began speaking in shorter sentences. Your compliments came out slower, measured. You stopped sharing the deeper parts of yourself. Without even realizing it, you were keeping score. The pendulum had swung, and you could feel it in your chest. Desire was no longer pure. It was mixed with suspicion, laced with self-protection. Here's the cruel truth. Once a man notices the first crack in the glass, he can't unsee it. You can patch it, polish it, pretend it's not there. But deep down, you know it's only a matter of time before the whole thing shatters. And then came that night, the one you'll never forget. You were lying next to her, but it felt like you were in separate worlds. Her breathing was steady, eyes closed, but you knew she wasn't asleep. You could feel the tension, the kind you sense before a thunderstorm. In the past, you would have reached for her hand, whispered something to make her smile, pulled her closer. But that night, you didn't move. You just stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every small withdrawal that had piled up between you. And in that silence, something ancient inside you stirred. Jung called it meeting the shadow, the part of yourself you hide away, the one built for survival, not love. For years you kept your shadow locked up, believing that patience, forgiveness, and openness were the higher path. But now, the shadow was whispering something else. It was telling you that unconditional love is a dangerous myth, that you can't walk into the arena with your chest unarmored, that you have to play the game, whether you want to or not. From that night forward, you started making calculations. You gave affection when it served you. You withheld when you wanted to create tension. You answered texts later than you used to. You said no to small requests, just to watch her reaction. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was adaptation. The cold realization that in this game, the man who plays with his heart exposed is the first to bleed out. And though you hated the way it worked, you couldn't ignore that it worked. The less you gave, the more she seemed to want you. The more distant you became, the closer she leaned in. It was sickening and addictive. At first, you told yourself it was temporary, just a phase, a necessary defense until things felt stable again. But slowly, almost without your permission, those small acts of withholding became your new default. You stopped fearing her loss. You stopped chasing approval through constant availability. You started valuing your own presence like currency, rare and therefore powerful. Scarcity, you realized, changes the game. When you're always there, you become part of the background. When you're not, you become the missing piece in her puzzle. And humans are wired to obsess over missing pieces. The same patience that once made you safe had made you disposable. Reliability without challenge, that's not security to most people. That's boredom. So, you gave her just enough to feel your warmth, and then stepped back before she could take it for granted. And it worked. It worked almost too well. Her texts became sweeter. Her eyes lingered on you longer. Her voice softened when she spoke your name. In public, her hand reached for yours again, as if trying to re-anchor herself to something she thought she'd lost. But here's the price. The warmth you once gave freely was gone. Every word now passed through a filter in your mind. What will this do to the dynamic? Will it make her more comfortable or keep her guessing? You had become the architect of her desire. Every pause, every glance, every delay was calculated. And though the results were intoxicating, they came with a cost. You could feel the good man in you sinking deeper beneath the surface. You began to study the game in earnest, not through cheap dating tricks or empty magazine advice, but through the psychology that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Machiavelli's words echoed in your mind, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Not fear in the sense of danger, but fear in the sense of consequence. The unspoken understanding that losing you would hurt more than she was prepared to endure. So you rationed yourself, not your body, but your presence, not your touch, but your attention. You discovered a truth most people never admit out loud. Desire is fed by uncertainty. The moment she feels she has all of you, her mind begins to wander. So you never gave her all of you, not anymore. And in doing so, you learned something darker. Control is addictive, because when you hold the power to pull someone closer or push them away with a single move, it's hard to remember what it felt like to live without that leverage. But here's the irony that began to haunt you. In order to keep her, you had to be someone you weren't sure you even liked anymore. The man who once loved without limits was gone. In his place stood someone women found magnetic, but who could barely remember the last time he felt something genuine. What started as survival had now become a craft. You no longer played this way just with her, you played it with everyone. You kept 2, sometimes 3 conversations going at once. Nothing serious, just options. Like a chess player keeping multiple boards in motion, each move feeding the quiet satisfaction that you were never cornered, never dependent. You learned the art of timing, leaving a message unread just long enough for it to live rent-free in her mind, responding at the exact moment when your absence began to feel like loss. Disappearing for a weekend, then reappearing with the calm confidence of someone who doesn't owe explanations. And it worked. Every time. You watched patterns emerge with mathematical precision. The longer you took to reply, the longer their next message became. The more space you created, the more eagerly they filled it. Scarcity multiplied your value, just as you knew it would. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of integrating all the parts of yourself, even the dark ones. And that's how you justified it. You told yourself you weren't being manipulative. You were simply embracing the sides of you that once lived in chains. The shadow wasn't your enemy anymore. It was your weapon. But here's the part you didn't admit, not even to yourself. You liked the control. You liked knowing that you could make someone crave you more by giving them less. You liked watching them fight for your attention. The very thing you used to give away for free. Before, love had felt like a leap of faith. Now, it felt like chess. Every compliment was a move, every withdrawal, a calculated check. And here was the most unsettling discovery. Women responded to this man more than they ever responded to the good man you used to be. The same warmth that once left you overlooked was now wrapped in cold precision, and suddenly they chased you. But there was a shadow in all this victory, because what you were building wasn't connection, it was performance. A role you played so convincingly, even you began to believe it. Some nights, you sat surrounded by people who wanted you, and felt nothing. You remembered when you wanted just one person, when love wasn't a strategy, when you didn't have to measure every touch and word. But that man, he was long gone. And the truth you avoided was this: you hadn't mastered the game had mastered you. Because once the rules became second nature, you weren't playing to protect yourself anymore. You were playing for the thrill of winning. The game had become the goal, and winning it didn't make you feel whole. It just made you want to play again. On the surface, you had everything you once thought you wanted. Women leaned in now. They adjusted their schedules for you. Their eyes followed you in the way yours once followed hers. You were no longer the man waiting for someone to choose you. You were the man they tried to keep. And there was a dark satisfaction in that. It was proof that you'd evolved, that you'd beaten the system that once chewed you up and spat you out. You told yourself you'd never feel that sting of rejection again. And you were right. Rejection didn't happen anymore. But then, the nights got quiet. The messages, the playful tension, the dates, they were all smoke and mirrors. You had built an empire of interest, but none of it was intimacy. You had mastered attraction, but you'd lost the will to trust. Schopenhauer warned that human longing is like drinking seawater. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. And you were living proof. Each conquest gave you a hit of validation, but never the nourishment of connection. Control kept you safe, but it also kept you alone. Even when someone lay next to you, you kept the gates locked, because to open them would mean risking the same wound you swore you'd never feel again. And yet, in the quietest moments, the man you used to be still whispered from somewhere deep inside, "Is this really strength, or is it just armor you're afraid to take off?" You never answered that voice. You drowned it in movement, new faces, new games, new patterns to master. But the truth gnawed at you. You hadn't just traded heartbreak for control. You'd traded one kind of vulnerability for another. Before you risked being hurt. Now, you risked never feeling anything real again. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And maybe that's what this was now. Not fate, but an unexamined habit. A cycle you refused to break because the game felt safer than the unknown. And the victories? They were shrinking. Each one felt a little less satisfying than the last. The emptiness between them was growing louder. Somewhere inside you knew you could keep playing forever, but the longer you did, the harder it would be to remember what it felt like to love without a scoreboard. You don't have to go back to the man you were. That's not the lesson here. You've earned your armor. Every dent, every scar in it tells a story. It kept you alive when you were bleeding out from the inside. It taught you how to walk away without begging. It showed you that your time, your attention, your presence are worth something. But here's the paradox. Strength isn't keeping the armor on forever. Strength is knowing when to take it off. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not living entirely in your shadow, not rejecting it either, but letting both parts of you exist in the same room. The warmth and the calculation, the openness and the boundary. The man who can walk away is powerful, but the man who can walk away and still choose to stay, that man is unshakable. Schopenhauer saw life as a cycle of longing and disappointment. Maybe he was right, but that doesn't mean you can't find meaning inside that cycle, moments worth risking for, even if they're not guaranteed to last forever. The path forward isn't about blind trust, it's about wise trust. Setting boundaries so strong they don't need to be tested. Knowing that if she walks away, you will still stand. Not because you've numbed yourself to loss, but because your life is too full, too self-built, for one person to take it away. You work on yourself, not just the armor, but the man underneath it. You build a life that doesn't depend on someone else's approval to feel complete. You become whole in a way that makes your presence magnetic, not because you withhold it, but because it's rooted in something unshakable. And then, when you meet her, the one who sparks that dangerous question, could I take the armor off for her? You won't be stepping into it blind. You'll be stepping in with eyes open, ready to give without losing yourself. Because in the end, the real game isn't about never being hurt again. It's about knowing you can survive the hurt and still choose to love. So guard yourself when you must. Let her chase if she wants, but don't let the shadow rule you forever. You've already proved you can play the ruthless player. Now, prove you can be more than that.